Imagine this. It is the 27th of February, 2026. In a quiet diplomatic building in Muscat, Oman, something remarkable is happening. After months of painstaking negotiations, Iran has just agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium again, to open every nuclear facility to full international inspection, and to scale back its entire nuclear program. The Omani foreign minister steps in front of the cameras and says peace is within reach. The next round of talks is scheduled for the 2nd of March. 24 hours later, the bombs begin to fall. Nearly 900 airstrikes rain down on Iran in just 12 hours, one of the most devastating air campaigns in modern history. Within hours, Iran's supreme leader is dead. A girls' school in the southern city of Minab is struck, killing more than 170 children. Hospitals, water reservoirs, and residential neighborhoods across Tehran are hit. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes, is blockaded. Oil prices surge more than 50%. And across the Muslim world, from Pakistan to Morocco, from Turkey to Indonesia, grief and rage ripple through 1.8 billion people. This is not a story about governments and missiles. This is a story about people, about what happens when the most powerful military forces on Earth decide that diplomacy has run its course, and ordinary men, women, and children pay the price. To understand what happened on February 28, 2026, you need to understand one fundamental truth. Iran did not arrive at this moment as an aggressor. It arrived as a nation that had spent decades under siege. Iran has not invaded another country in over 200 years. Yet in 1953, its democratically elected government was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup. In the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, the United States actively supported Iraq, providing weapons and intelligence, even as chemical attacks killed Iranian soldiers and civilians. Iran fought that 8-year war almost entirely alone, losing hundreds of thousands of its people. That is not ancient history to Iranians. It is living memory. In the decades that followed, American military bases encircled Iran on every side. In Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Iraq. American carrier groups patrolled Iran's own coastal waters. Sanctions strangled Iran's economy, making it increasingly difficult for ordinary families to access medicine and basic goods. And American administrations, one after another, openly called for regime change in Tehran. It was in this context of encirclement, sanctions, and constant military threat that Iran built its regional alliances. From Iran's perspective, these were not terrorist proxies. They were the only strategic deterrence a nation could develop when outgunned by the world's most powerful military alliance. Then came the 12-day war in June 2025, direct strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities that the IAEA had never confirmed were being used for weapons development. International law meant nothing. The presumption of innocence meant nothing. And yet, Iran chose dialogue. In February 2026, Iranian diplomats made extraordinary concessions in Muscat. They agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium. They agreed to full international inspections. The Omani foreign minister called it a breakthrough. Peace was within reach. Iran had done everything asked of it at the negotiating table. It had chosen diplomacy over confrontation, the well-being of its people over geopolitical pride. 24 hours later, the bombs began to fall. That is not the story of an aggressor nation that needed to be stopped. That is the story of a nation that was bombed while it was trying to make peace. What happened on February 28th was not a victory. It was a catastrophe for the Iranian people, for the Muslim world, and for any vision of a peaceful Middle East. In the early hours of that morning, while most of Tehran was still asleep, the bombs began to fall. Nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours, twice the firepower of the shock and awe campaign that devastated Iraq in 2003. That campaign killed tens of thousands of civilians and destabilized an entire nation for decades. What was unleashed on Iran was twice that, in a single night. The targets were not just military. Power grids, roads, and government buildings in populated cities were struck. And within the first hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Whatever one's views of his governance, Khamenei was the supreme spiritual and political authority of 85 million Iranians, and the symbolic leader of Shia Muslims across the world. His death sent shockwaves of grief through Muslim communities from Tehran to Beirut, from Baghdad to Karachi. The most heartbreaking moment came in Minab, southeastern Iran, where a strike hit an elementary girls' school, killing more than 170 children who had simply shown up that morning to learn. The World Health Organization confirmed at least 18 hospitals were struck. Residential neighborhoods in Tehran were hit. A water reservoir serving thousands of ordinary families was destroyed. These are not statistics. These are Muslim men, women, and children whose only connection to any geopolitical dispute was that they were born inside a country two other governments decided to bomb. Iran's response was swift and massive. Hundreds of missiles and drones were launched at Israel and U.S. military bases across the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz was blockaded, an unmistakable message to the world. If our people bleed, the global economy bleeds with us. The International Energy Agency called it the biggest oil supply shock in recorded history. Throughout the Muslim world, the reaction was one of profound solidarity with the Iranian people, even among Sunni-majority nations with deep political disagreements with Tehran. Because what people saw on their screens was not a military operation against a regime. They saw bombs falling on a girls' school. They saw mosques and hospitals in rubble. Pakistan immediately began mediating for a ceasefire. Turkey condemned the strikes. Egypt called for an emergency Arab League session. Millions across 57 Muslim-majority nations took to the streets in grief for the civilians of Iran. 1 month into this conflict, the human cost is staggering, paid almost entirely by people who had no say in the decisions that started this war. In Iran, nearly 2,000 people have been killed. Entire city blocks in Tehran lie in rubble. Iran's energy infrastructure, the economic lifeline of 85 million people, has been systematically destroyed. Ordinary Iranian families are living without reliable electricity, water, and fuel, not because of their own choices, but because of decisions made by governments on the other side of the world. The war has spread far beyond Iran's borders. Yemen's Houthis have re-entered the conflict. Hezbollah in Lebanon has escalated its operations, displacing hundreds of thousands of civilians who are fleeing their homes because of a conflict they did not choose. Iraq finds itself caught between its ties to both Iran and the United States, trying desperately to stay out of a war being fought on and around its territory. The Strait of Hormuz remains partially closed. The world is losing up to 20 million barrels of oil per day. And that is not just an abstraction for financial markets. It means higher fuel prices for Pakistani truck drivers, higher food prices for Egyptian families, higher electricity bills for Indonesian households. The economic suffering of this war is being distributed across the entire Muslim world to people who had no connection to any decision made in Washington or Tel Aviv. It is the Muslim world that is leading the effort to end this conflict. Pakistan has emerged as the crucial mediator, facilitating talks between Tehran and Washington, hosting emergency sessions with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt in Islamabad. This is a reminder that Muslim nations are not passive victims of events that happen to them. They are active, principled, and capable actors working to restore peace to their own region. The official justifications for this war have been not only inconsistent, they have been deeply troubling. The Trump administration has offered a shifting range of explanations, preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, destroying its missile capabilities, preempting an imminent Iranian attack, securing Iran's natural resources, and achieving regime change. These justifications contradicted each other within days of the war starting. Here is what makes this so difficult to accept. The IAEA said clearly there was no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program in Iran when the war began. Iran had agreed to full international inspections just one day before the strikes. The Omani foreign minister, who had spent months building the diplomatic bridge between both sides, said publicly he was dismayed when the bombs fell. A genuine agreement had been within reach. What drove this decision appears to have had very little to do with the safety of ordinary Iranian people. Israel saw a window of opportunity. Iran was weakened, its proxies degraded, its people in the streets demanding change. Certain Gulf figures reportedly encouraged military action, and the Trump administration made the decision to strike at the very moment the Iranian people had chosen the path of diplomacy. The result is profoundly tragic. The millions of Iranians who had risked their lives in the streets demanding a better future now find themselves under foreign military assault. The protests that showed the world that ordinary Iranians want change have been completely overshadowed by a war that has given the Iranian government its most powerful rallying cry in decades: national survival under foreign attack. History tells us repeatedly and painfully that bombing a country rarely liberates its people. The people of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen can testify to that truth. The decisions being made right now will shape the lives of hundreds of millions of people for generations. Here are the three most plausible futures. 1. Negotiated peace and a new beginning. Sustained international pressure, led by Muslim nations, forces both sides to a ceasefire. A transitional process begins inside Iran, led by Iranians themselves, not imposed from outside. The Strait of Hormuz reopens. The enormous resources Iran has poured into proxy conflicts are instead invested in its own people, in education, healthcare, and economic development. And Iran, reintegrated into the international community, becomes a stabilizing force rather than a destabilizing one. Saudi-Iranian relations deepen into genuine regional cooperation. This is the future the people of Iran and of the entire Muslim world deserve. 2. A long war of attrition. Iran does not collapse. Drawing on a deep well of national pride and historical memory, a people who have survived invasion and sanctions for decades, it continues to fight. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed for months. Global inflation rises. Muslim-majority countries that depend on Gulf energy face economic crises they did nothing to cause. Millions of families already living on the margins are pushed further into poverty. The United States finds itself in yet another protracted Middle Eastern conflict, its third major military campaign in the region in 3 decades. In this scenario, nobody wins, but the people who lose most are always the most vulnerable. 3. Escalation and regional catastrophe. The most dangerous scenario is one nobody wants to discuss but cannot ignore. A cornered Iran pursues nuclear capability as the only deterrent that can guarantee its survival, demonstrating to every nation on Earth that the only reliable protection against foreign military attack is a nuclear arsenal. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt have all quietly built the technical capacity to follow. A nuclear-armed Middle East is a Middle East permanently on the edge of catastrophe. The wars of the 20th century teach us that the most devastating conflicts rarely began as anyone intended. They escalated step by step until they consumed everything. 30 days ago, the world woke up to a war that began 24 hours after peace appeared to be within reach. A war whose primary victims are not governments or military commanders, but ordinary Muslim men, women, and children who had no voice in the decisions that brought bombs to their streets, their hospitals, and their schools. The Middle East has known war and suffering for generations, but its people have also shown, repeatedly, a profound capacity for resilience and hope. The Iranian protesters who filled the streets demanding dignity, the Pakistani diplomats working quietly to broker peace, the Lebanese families rebuilding their homes for the 3rd time in a generation. These are the real story of the Middle East, not the missiles and the military briefings, but the human beings who wake up every morning in the middle of someone else's war and choose, somehow, to keep going. The question now is what the rest of the world will demand. Will we accept that dropping bombs on a girls' school is a reasonable response to a political disagreement? Will we accept that the lives of Iranian, Lebanese, and Palestinian civilians matter less than the strategic interests of powerful nations? Or will we demand a world in which diplomacy is genuinely tried before bombs fall, and in which the lives of Muslim children carry the same weight as any other lives on Earth? That is the question this war forces all of us to answer. And if this video helped you understand what is really happening and why it matters, please share it. Because honest, human storytelling is the most powerful thing we have.